Hi, everyone. Hope you're all having a great day. Thanks so much for joining me. This is the Catholic Bible Daily Reflections podcast. My name is Caroline, and I'm so glad you're here joining me. Today, we are discussing Genesis chapters 18 and 19 in the Catholic Bible. It is daily reflection number 9, episode number 9. So, we are now at a point in the Bible where God visits Abraham again. And we have talked about this waiting period that Abraham and Sarah have been going through. They have waited on God to fulfill the promise and the covenant that they had received from God, that Sarah and Abraham would have their own son. God in chapter 18 now, after sealing the covenant in the prior Genesis chapters in the storyline for Abraham and Sarah, where he had renamed them and he sealed the covenant with the circumcision, Abraham, Ishmael, and all of his men and all of the male Israelites have all been circumcised at this point. And we're following through different years, right? There's additional years that go by. Abraham is patiently and obediently waiting for God. And now God comes to visit Abraham with two of his angels. And he comes to Abraham. Abraham sees them and he serves them. And as they're sitting there, God asks, where is your wife Sarah? And Abraham says, in the tent. And God says, in due season, your wife Sarah will have a son. And Sarah laughs, right? This is very famous story, right? Very, known story where she laughs and God says, because God's everywhere, right? He says to her sort of, while he's still talking to Abraham, he says to Sarah in the tent, some distance away, why did you laugh? And she's afraid, right? This is God speaking to her. She can't see him, but she says, I didn't laugh. And he says, yes, you did. You will have a son. And she's like, I'm old. Abraham is old. Can I have this pleasure in my age? And God says something very famously. I absolutely love this line in this chapter 18, where God says to Sarah, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? One thing that we all have heard, I'm sure you've heard other people say, where is, with God, all things are possible, right? But this line is just so memorable for me. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? All things are possible with the Lord. If you have faith. And so, she is now told that she will have a son. And so the long awaited, child will come. We see that God is still talking to Abraham, and the two angels are there. And God says to Abraham, he's kind of saying, should we let Abraham know what's going on, why we're kind of passing through. And they agree that if you're making Abraham a father of many nations, you should tell him. And so God tells Abraham, our angels are going to test the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. This cry of wickedness has reached all the way to heaven. And so Abraham says, you're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, two great cities. And he says, again, these are all very famous things. I'm sure you may have seen these in movies, the Bible movie, for example, the series of movies from the Bible. Very, very wonderful video series. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's the Bible series. It's like 5 episodes. I think Mark Burnett and Roma Downey had produced and created this movie series. So excellent. So God says, we're going to test them. And then Abraham says, You are a just God. You are not going to destroy the cities if there are 50 righteous men in there, are you? And God, in his patience, because, God doesn't have to tell him, but God does. God says, if I can see 50 righteous men in these cities, I would save the whole cities. And then Abraham continues on. He says, oh, forgive me. But if you see 40 righteous men in the cities, you're not going to destroy the cities, are you? And he continues on with 30, 20, and finally with 10. He says to God, if there are 10 righteous men, you will not destroy the cities, will you? And God says, if I can find 10 righteous men in the cities, I will not destroy the cities. And he leaves Abraham. So, God has these conversations with Abraham, and we see that God is all powerful, and God is just away from us, right? That he's not there with us. But if this tells you anything, it shows you that God is there and he will talk to you. If you pray to God and you talk to God, that God will talk to you. The Holy Spirit will talk to you. Your guardian angels, your angels will talk to you. The angels protecting you will talk to you. If you've had experiences, there are ways that God communicates with all of us that we will understand. God communicates in ways that we understand. And so if you pray to him, if you sit in silence, God will speak to you in your mind. He will speak to you through his angels. And we'll see in the Bible also that God uses different ways to communicate through his angels, through the Holy Spirit, through their minds. Personally, right? God appeared to Abraham. God appeared to Moses. Moses and God were friends. And he shared so much with Moses. So we'll see all that in the Bible, but God will speak to you in a way that you can understand if you pray to him. And here he is speaking to Abraham. He is filling him in. He's letting him in on this plan of his to test the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, to see if there's any righteous men. And if not, God's plan is to destroy these cities. The wickedness was tremendous in these cities. Tremendous. I mean, just all sorts of evil from these cities, and so we see about that in chapter 19. They talk about the depravity in those cities. We're talking child sacrifices, we're talking fornication, adultery, all of these evil, murder, violence, just evil. And it came to a point that God was going to do something about it. And we see that in chapter 19, where the city is tested. Now, Lot lives there, right? So Abraham is extremely worried about his nephew Lot. He considers him almost like a son. And so Lot is there. And for the sake of Abraham, God spares Lot and his family. And he tells his angels, we will spare Lot and his families for the sake of Abraham. The angels go there, they test the cities, and then they pull out Lot and his wife and the two daughters. The sons-in-law of the daughters, they were to be married. They stayed behind. So if you think about Sodom and Gomorrah and sin, right? Sometimes it's very hard for people to leave sinful environments, right? For all of us, right? If you are in an environment that's sinful, you may not even know how sinful it is. I'm sure here they did know it was sinful, but we don't know that for sure. It's not really written in here why Lot and his family stayed there. But there's compromising that you might do. You may not think it's bad enough that you can deal with it. You may be partaking in the sins yourself, and it's hard to sort of fully explain. But if you're thinking of Sodom and Gomorrah, you think of sin and the kind of this comparison, this kind of metaphor for what sin is, and when you're living with it or living around it, if it's around you. If you're a righteous person living amongst sinful people, you may be compromising and settling and not not necessarily evil, which Lot was not evil, and his family was not evil, but they were living amongst evil peoples, and they did not leave those peoples. And so we can look at Lot and we can say, is he foolish, compromising, settling, not escaping sin? And in your life today, if there is sin all around you, I can just say, head the other way. Never compromise with sin. Never think that you can just handle it. Run away from it. You should run away from all sin, your past sins, right? This is why I think we'll see later in the chapters like Leviticus and everything about separating yourself from sin, because what you live with. And this is why God was very adamant with the Israelites. Do not intermarry with the land of Canaan, the people of the land of Canaan, because the land of Canaan had a lot of evil people in it. Paganism was rampant there, and fornication and adultery and all sorts of sinful, violent behavior. And so God said, do not intermarry. And we'll see that later in Exodus, because once you start letting sin creep into your life, it can take you over and you may sin yourself. And so Lot was in the middle of this, but for the sake of Abraham, the angels come and they take Lot and his wife and 2 daughters and say, flee. God will destroy these cities. Sodom and Gomorrah will be destroyed. Run away, flee. And so Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters do start to make their way into the hills and to a little town outside of those cities. And God, of the angels, actually tell them, do not look back at the city of sin. That's another sort of reference to, if you are away from sin, do not look back. Like if you have a sinful past, don't look back at it. Don't try to go back to it. And that's what this sort of example shows, that the angels are saying to Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters, do not turn back to the cities of sin. Lot's wife, and she's never named in the Bible here. She's not named anywhere, but she turns back. And that's another sort of comparison to looking back at your past or wishing that you could go back to your past. She was curious. She was, we don't know for sure, but it's sort of like it's kind of a comparison saying, she was looking back at her past. And, St. Paul later in the New Testament says, this is what I do. I lean forward, right? I do not look back. I lean forward, right? Separate yourself from sin. Don't look back at your sin. And Lot's wife looked back at the sinful cities, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. I think that Jesus references her in the New Testament. Of course, she's never named, but that, don't be like Lot's wife, who turned back and was turned into a pillar of salt. That was disobeying God. So we see that as an important sort of example for us to follow. Never look back at your past sins, never look back at your past life and want to be back there. You head forward towards God. And disobeying God, she was turned into a pillar of salt. So we see that Lot escapes. He's allowed to escape with his family. So him and his daughters leave. They flee into the hills. And we see that they talk about this story here with the daughters, where Lot flees with his daughters. His wife is now a pillar of salt. They flee to the hills. They think they're the only ones left in the world. And after seeing this great, the city's destroyed. And so the daughters, now adults, they have no husbands now, and their fiancés were just killed. And so they come up with a plan to get descendants, right? The Israelite people, and probably all people in general at that time period, the greatest thing that you could do is to have sons so that you could carry on the family line. And so they come up with this plan. They say, we're the only ones left in this world, and if we are going to have descendants, we need to have those with our father. And so there's the incest here, where they both get their father drunk, Lot, and then sleep with him. Each one becomes pregnant. We don't hear about them again, other than the fact that their descendants will become the Ammonites and the Moabites, paganistic cultures and descendants, paganistic, meaning that, that they followed other gods. They had sacrifice, child sacrifice as well. So we'll hear more about the Moabites and the Ammonites when the Israelites take over all of these lands in the land of Canaan. But these are this chapter, in this chapter 19, it's the shameful origins of the Moabites and the Ammonites. They came from this incest. So you can see this evil, right? The foolishness and the evil. But it's important stories. We see those through this chapters 18 and 19. And we'll continue on with chapter 20, where we see that Sarah and Abraham will have a son, Isaac, and the line will continue, this line with God that will take us through the rest of the Bible. So I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. Very interesting chapters and great stories about history, our history, and the history of this Israelite people, and the foreshadowing into the future. A lot of Genesis, the beginning of all beginnings, takes us right through to the rest of God's plan, the promise, the covenant, and our history.